The rain in Port Callaway doesn't just fall, it punishes. It's a cold, horizontal needle spray that smells of salt and old secrets, the kind of weather that forces everyone inside to huddle around fireplaces and pretend they're safe. I am standing in the driveway of the most expensive estate on the coastline, clutching a gift bag that feels heavier than lead. Inside is a designer Italian leather belt, a peace offering for a man who hasn't looked me in the eye since the Bush administration. My stepfather, Julian, is turning 60 tonight. From the driveway, the house looks like a glowing fortress. Warm, amber light spills from the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the bass from a jazz trio hums through the glass, vibrating in my teeth. I can see the silhouettes of the town's elite, the mayors, the developers, the people who keep the gears of this county turning, swirling like goldfish in a lit tank. And then there's the guesthouse. It sits 30 yards to the left, a dark, weathered structure that looks like an afterthought. That is where I grew up. Not in the main house with the heated floors and the ocean views, but in the storage room above the old boat slip, sleeping on a twin mattress that always felt damp from the spray of the Atlantic. I should go in. I've spent 2 hours on my hair, 40 minutes on the drive, and 22 years of my life trying to find a door in this family that wasn't locked. I pressed my silk blouse until the creases were sharp enough to cut. I put on the pearl earrings my father gave me before he vanished into the fog. I did everything a daughter is supposed to do when she's about to walk into a room full of people who have spent 2 decades perfecting the art of looking right through her. But as I stand here, the wind howling off the cliffs, I don't see a party. I see a stage. And what is about to happen inside those walls over the next 4 hours will do more than just ruin a birthday. It will dismantle 22 years of meticulously crafted lies. It started with a man I thought had abandoned me, walking through the front door with a blue manila folder that held the power to burn this entire legacy to the ground. But before I take you inside, before I show you how the perfect image of the Sycamore Estate shattered, I need you to understand how I became a ghost in my own home. Take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because once this story starts moving, there is no turning back. Now, let's go back to 2005, the year the sawdust died and the silence began. The year I turned 9, the world tasted like cedar and salt. My father, Silas, was a boat builder. A man whose hands were permanently stained with resin and whose laugh could be heard over the roar of a circular saw. We lived in a small, shingled cottage off the pier in Callaway Cove. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Every afternoon at 3:15, like clockwork, his old blue pickup would idle at the school curb. He'd be leaning against the door, covered in wood shavings, waving a hand that smelled like the ocean. He called me his little anchor. He told me that as long as we had the sea and a sturdy hull, nothing could ever truly get lost. Then came the Tuesday in October when the wind changed. I walked home from the bus stop and found our front door wide open. My mother, Evelyn, was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded over a stack of legal papers. There were no wood shavings in the air. There was no smell of cedar. Just the sterile, sharp scent of lemon bleach. She didn't look at me. She just pointed to 2 suitcases sitting by the door. She told me my father was gone. She said he had chosen the sea over us, that he'd decided a life on the water was easier than the weight of a family. I asked when he was coming back. She said he wasn't. I asked why he didn't say goodbye. She told me that some men find goodbyes too expensive for their conscience. I was 9 years old. I didn't know about custody battles or legal filings. I didn't know that people could weaponize words to erase a person from existence. I just knew that the man who called me his little anchor had drifted away without a word, and the silence he left behind was deafening. 3 months later, Julian arrived. He was a pillar of the community, a man who spoke in calm, measured tones and wore suits that cost more than my father's truck. He had 2 daughters of his own, Maya and Sarah. Their mother had passed away years prior, and Julian was the tragic, noble widower. By Christmas, they were married. By New Year's, we were moving into the Sycamore Estate. The estate was a sprawling masterpiece of glass and stone, perched on a cliffside that overlooked the very bay where my father used to build his boats. It had 6 bedrooms, a library, and a kitchen with marble islands that looked like they'd never seen a crumb. As we walked through the foyer, Maya and Sarah were giggling, running up the grand staircase to claim the rooms with the balcony views. I stood at the base of the stairs, holding my one suitcase, waiting for my mother to show me where I belonged. She didn't lead me upstairs. She didn't show me a room with a plush carpet or a window seat. She walked me through the kitchen, out the back door, and across the stone path to the guest house. She opened the heavy oak door to the storage room above the boat slip. It was a cold, cavernous space filled with Julian's seasonal gear, skis, old sails, and rusted anchors. In the corner, sitting directly on the gray concrete floor, was a thin mattress covered in a plastic sheet. Evelyn smiled at me, a bright, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She told me it was temporary. She said I was an artistic soul, and that I would appreciate the solitude and the view of the water. She said it would be like an adventure. That temporary adventure lasted 9 years. I spent my adolescence in the shadows of that guest house. I learned to sleep through the sound of the tide hitting the pilings beneath me. I learned to dress by the light of a single, flickering bulb I'd rigged with an extension cord. While Maya's room was painted a soft lavender with a canopy bed, and Sarah's room featured a built-in desk where she studied for her Ivy League future, I was learning how to keep my clothes from smelling like damp concrete. Every morning, I would walk across the lawn, enter the main house through the mudroom, and prepare for a day of pretending. One afternoon, a neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Gable who lived 3 estates down, came over for tea. She saw me coming out of the guest house with a stack of schoolbooks. She asked my mother if that was a playhouse for the children. Evelyn didn't skip a beat. She leaned in, her voice hushed and conspiratorial, and told Mrs. Gable that I was highly independent, and had insisted on having my own studio space away from the noise of the house. She made it sound like a luxury, like she was the most supportive mother in the world for allowing her daughter to live in a shed. I was 12. I didn't insist on anything. I just did what I was told because I had been convinced that I was lucky to even be there. I was the extra child, the one who had to be accommodated, the one whose biological father hadn't even cared enough to send a birthday card. Or so I was told. I became the invisible photographer of the Sycamore Estate. Every holiday, every birthday, every family milestone, I was the one holding the camera. I have thousands of photos of the 4 of them. Julian, Evelyn, Maya, and Sarah, smiling in front of the fireplace, laughing on the deck, opening gifts under the massive Christmas tree. If you look at the mantel in that house today, you will see 20 years of history. You'll see the girls' graduation photos, Julian's awards, Evelyn's charity gala portraits. You will see a family of 4. You won't find a single trace of me. I was the one who captured the memories, which meant I was never allowed to be in them. My mother used to tell me that I had a gift for perspective, and that I was the one who made the family look its best. It took me a long time to realize that perspective was just another word for exclusion. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped looking for my face in the frames. I had learned to move through the house like a ghost, serving drinks at their parties, cleaning the kitchen after their dinners, and then retreating to my concrete floor while the sounds of their laughter echoed across the lawn. I was a staff accountant for my own life, tracking the debts of affection I was owed and realizing the ledger would never balance. But even a ghost starts to notice when the walls are built out of something more sinister than just neglect. It started during my senior year, when I asked a question about a college fund that I assumed didn't exist, only to find out that the money was there. It was always there. It just wasn't for me. And as I stand in this driveway now, the wind tearing at my silk blouse, I realized that the box I found in the guest house 20 minutes ago didn't just contain old junk. It contained the breath of a man I thought was dead to me, and a truth so sharp it's about to cut this night wide open. The fireplace in the grand salon of the Sycamore Estate is a masterpiece of carved limestone, but to me, it has always been a memorial to a girl who never existed. Above the hearth, 44 silver and gold frames are arranged in a perfect, geometric grid. It's a visual timeline of a decade and a half of perfection. There is Julian and Maya on a catamaran in the Caribbean. There is Sarah in her riding habit, holding a blue ribbon. There is my mother, Evelyn, looking radiant in a silk gown at a winter gala. It is a gallery of smiles, of belonging, of a family of 4. I have stood in front of that mantel 1,000 times, dustcloth in hand, looking for a stray reflection of myself in the glass, only to realize that I am the only thing in this house that doesn't cast a shadow. I remember one afternoon when I was 16. I was polishing the silver frames, my fingers tracing the edge of a photo from the previous summer's trip to the Hamptons. I had stayed behind to watch the house and look after the dogs. I asked my mother why there were no pictures of me, not even a school photo or a snapshot from a birthday. She didn't even look up from her correspondence. She just tucked a stray hair behind her ear and said, "You're the one who captures the light, Elara. Without you behind the lens, none of this would look quite so beautiful." It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She turned my exclusion into a compliment, a duty that I was supposed to be proud of. She made me believe that being erased was the highest form of service I could offer to the people I loved. But being the invisible photographer meant I saw things the others didn't. I saw the way Julian's smile dropped the second the camera was lowered. I saw the way my mother's eyes darted toward the mailbox every Tuesday, and how she would intercept the mail before anyone else could touch it. I saw the cracks in the foundation while they were all busy admiring the paint. I was a ghost, yes, but ghosts see everything. I watched as Maya and Sarah were fitted for debutante dresses that cost more than my father's entire workshop. I watched as the family narrative was polished until it shone, all while I retreated every night to a storage room that smelled of motor oil and old canvas. You start to wonder, after a while, if you're actually real, or if you're just a dream the house is having. But the sting of the cold concrete under your mattress? That's real. The hunger for a name on the mantle? That's real. And tonight, as the jazz trio plays an upbeat set in the corner, those years of being a phantom are coming to an end. The summer before I left for university was the first time I felt the weight of the $80,000 ghost. I was sitting in the guidance counselor's office at Callaway High, looking at a list of tuition fees that felt like phone numbers. Mr. Sterling, a man who smelled like peppermint and old paper, asked if my parents had a college savings plan. I told him I'd check, but I already knew the answer. That night, I found my mother in the kitchen, stirring a pot of lobster bisque for one of Julian's intimate business dinners. I asked her if there was anything set aside, anything from my father's estate, or perhaps a fund Julian had started. She didn't stop stirring. The spoon scraped against the copper pot with a rhythmic, grating sound. She told me that Silas had left us in a shroud of debt, so thick it had taken her years to climb out. She said Julian had been incredibly generous just to keep a roof over my head, even if that roof was a guesthouse storage unit. "We can't afford to save for 3, Elara," she whispered, her voice dropping into that fragile, victimized register she used whenever she wanted to end a conversation. Maya and Sarah's funds were established by Julian's first wife's family. It's their inheritance. You understand, don't you? I nodded because nodding was easier than screaming. I watched as Maya and Sarah received brand new SUVs for their high school graduations, European imports with leather seats that smelled like success. I watched as they toured elite private colleges without once looking at the price tag. Meanwhile, I was working 3 jobs, pulling shifts at the local diner, filing papers for a law firm, and cleaning boats at the marina. Just to afford the application fees and a used laptop. I didn't ask for help again. I learned that in the Sycamore Estate, there were 2 classes of citizens, those who were inherited, and those who were tolerated. I stayed up late in the guesthouse, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the dark, researching scholarships like my life depended on it. Because it did. I earned a full academic ride to the state university, 40 miles away. On graduation day, Julian and Evelyn sat in the front row, cheering loudly for Maya, who was graduating with a middling GPA but a bright future. When my name was called for the honors medal, my mother was in the lobby, taking a phone call from her decorator. Some silences tell you exactly where you stand in the hierarchy of a home. I left for school with one suitcase and $43 in my pocket, and I didn't look back for 3 years. The only reason the rope didn't snap entirely was Aunt Martha. She was my mother's older sister, a woman who lived in a saltbox cottage 3 towns over and refused to ever set foot in the Sycamore Estate. She called it the gilded cage. Martha was the only person who remembered my father's laugh. Every Sunday at 4 p.m., she would call my cell phone. She'd ask about my grades, my coffee intake, and whether I'd seen the sunset over the water. She never asked about my mother, and she never asked about the guesthouse. It was as if she knew that those topics were toxic. During my junior year, I visited her for tea. I was sitting on her porch, watching the waves, when I finally worked up the courage to ask, "Martha, why did my dad really leave? Why didn't he even send a letter?" Martha's hands, gnarled by years of gardening, tightened around her mug. She looked out at the horizon for a long time, her eyes tracing the line where the gray sea met the grayer sky. "The ocean always returns what it takes, Elara," she said, her voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across a sidewalk. "Your mother had her reasons, or so she told herself. But secrets in this family don't stay buried, they just ferment." I pressed her for more, but she just shook her head and grabbed my hand. "Just promise me one thing, little anchor. If you ever find yourself back in that house, look in the shadows. Don't look at what they show you. Look at what they've hidden." 2 months later, Aunt Martha died of a sudden stroke. The anchor was gone, and I was drifting. At the funeral, my mother cried beautifully into a lace handkerchief. Julian stood tall and somber. I sat in the back row, feeling the weight of the secrets Martha had tried to tell me. After she was gone, I found myself going back to the estate less and less. The visits dropped to just Thanksgiving, then just Christmas. Each time I returned, the guest house felt colder, the concrete floor harder. But I kept up the act. I washed the dishes, I took the photos, I smiled for the guests. I was the perfect ghost, waiting for the wind to change. And then, 3 days ago, the phone rang. My mother's voice was sharp, commanding. "Julian is 60 on Saturday. It's a milestone, Elara. I need you here by 5 o'clock. Wear something that doesn't look like you found it at a thrift store. And don't bring food, it's been catered. No, how are you? No, we miss you. Just an invoice for my presence." I went to the mall, I bought the belt, and I drove into the storm. I thought I was coming back for a party. I didn't realize I was coming back for an inheritance Martha had hinted at, one that was currently sitting in a cardboard box under a pile of rusted anchors. I walked into the guest house tonight just to clear my head, and that's when I saw the box. My name was on it, scrawled in my mother's perfect, looping cursive. And as I reached for the lid, the front door of the main house opened, and a man I haven't seen in 20 years stepped into the light. The air inside the main house is thick with the scent of roasted rosemary and expensive cologne, a sensory wall that hits you the moment you cross the threshold. It's a jubilee, they called it. A celebration of 6 decades of Julian's distinguished life. The jazz trio in the corner is playing something airy and fast, the kind of music that's designed to fill gaps in conversation so no one has to actually say anything of substance. I am standing near the mahogany buffet, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, watching the room. I've been here for an hour, and so far, I have been acknowledged by 3 people. The caterer, who asked me to move so he could set down a tray of seared scallops, a neighbor who mistook me for the help, and Julian, who gave me a sharp, efficient nod from across the room, the kind of look a captain gives a midshipman he expects to scrub the decks. Evelyn is in her element. She is wearing a dress the color of midnight, moving through the crowd like a shark through deep water, graceful, dangerous, and perfectly adapted to her environment. I watch her touch the elbow of a local judge, laugh at the joke of a tech CEO, and glide past me as if I were a piece of furniture she's grown tired of looking at. This is the Sycamore social dance. It is a world built on the theater of the gold standard family. Maya and Sarah are holding court near the grand piano, dressed in coordinated jewel tones, looking every bit the heiresses Julian's wealth has made them. They are the protagonists of this story. I am merely the stagehand, the one who makes sure the lighting is right and the props are in place. But tonight, the stagehand has found the script that was never meant to be read. I look at the fireplace mantel. There's a new photo since Christmas, the 4 of them on a yacht in the Mediterranean last July. 4 plane tickets. 4 sets of champagne flutes. 0 Elara. It is a beautiful, glossy lie. The room is full of people who have known me since I was 9 years old, people who watched a small, wide-eyed girl grow into a quiet, shadowed woman, and yet not one of them asks why I'm never in the frame. They've been trained to accept the omission. They've been taught that the girl in the guest house is a footnote, not a chapter. As my mother clinks her glass to begin the first of many toasts, I feel the weight of the box I just left in the dark. The Jubilee is about to face a reckoning that no amount of expensive catering can mask. The descent into the guest house was supposed to be a mundane errand. My mother had cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes darting to the empty crystal decanters on the sideboard. "Elara, be a dear," she'd whispered, her voice tight with the stress of maintaining a perfect party. "Run down to the guest house storage." I had the caterers put the vintage port and the extra wine glasses behind the sailing gear. "You know your way around down there." It was a dismissal disguised as a request, a way to get the extra child out of the room while the important people spoke. I didn't argue. I welcomed the cold air. I welcomed the escape from the suffocating smell of Julian's success. The guest house smelled exactly as it always had: salt, cold stone, and the faint, metallic tang of motor oil. I flipped the single light switch, the bulb humming with a low, mournful buzz. It's a graveyard of Julian's hobbies. Old windsurfing boards, stacks of winter tires, and a mountain of canvas sails that haven't seen the wind in years. I moved toward the back, pushing aside a heavy cedar chest, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't with the wine glasses. It was tucked into the shadows, pushed into the very corner where my mattress used to be. A cardboard box, the edges softened by humidity, sealed with yellowing tape. On the side, in the handwriting that used to sign my report cards, were the words, "Ease junk." I shouldn't have opened it. I should have grabbed the glasses and run back to the warmth of the main house. But Aunt Martha's voice was ringing in my ears, "Look in the shadows." I pulled back the tape. The first thing I saw was a drawing I'd made in the 3rd grade, a crude crayon sketch of a boat with 3 people on it. Underneath that were report cards I'd been told were lost, a plastic participation trophy from a middle school swim meet, and a small, wooden carving of a whale, something my father had started for me the week before he'd left. And then, at the very bottom, buried under the debris of a discarded childhood, I saw the bundle. 15 envelopes, held together by a rubber band that snapped the moment I touched it. They were white, standard size, and addressed to me in a hand that was thick, steady, and unmistakably Silas's. My heart didn't just beat, it slammed against my ribs. I sat down on the concrete floor, the very spot where I'd spent 1,000 lonely nights, and I realized the abandonment I'd survived for 2 decades was a ghost story invented by the woman upstairs. I picked up the first envelope. The postmark was from December 2005, just 2 months after my father supposedly chose the sea over me. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a birthday card with a hand-drawn anchor on the front. "Happy 10th birthday, little anchor," it read. "I've tried to call a dozen times, but the number is disconnected. Your mother says you need space to adjust to the new house, but I'm right here in Callaway. I'm building a new hull, the one we talked about. I named her the Elara. I miss you every second. Love, Dad." There was a $10 bill tucked inside. The bill was crisp, never spent, never even seen. I moved to the next one. 2006, 2007. 2008, every single year, like a heartbeat, a card had arrived. Some had photos. Silas standing in front of a workshop, Silas with a dog I didn't recognize, Silas looking older, grayer, but always with that same, steady carpenter's gaze. And in every single card, the same message: I'm still here. I'm not hard to find. I never left. I felt a sob catch in my throat, a raw, jagged thing that threatened to tear me apart. For 15 years, I had slept on this concrete floor believing I was unlovable, believing that the man who built me my first cradle had walked away without a backward glance. And all that time, he was less than 10 miles away, writing letters that were being intercepted, read, and then buried in the dirt under my head. I looked at the last card in the bundle. 2020, the handwriting was smaller now, a bit more labored. Elara, I don't know if you're getting these. I don't know if you've moved or if you just don't want to see me. But I want you to know I've kept every penny of the child support I've been sending to that P.O. box, hoping you'd use it for school one day. I'm still at the workshop. If you ever want to come home, the door isn't just unlocked, it's wide open. I sat there in the dark of the guest house, the jazz music from the main house drifting across the lawn like a mockery. I wasn't just neglected, I was a victim of a 20-year heist. My mother hadn't just stolen my father, she'd stolen my identity, my security, and the very air I breathed. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and I tucked the bundle of letters into my bag. I didn't grab the port. I didn't grab the wine glasses. I walked back toward the glowing fortress of the Sycamore Estate, no longer a ghost, but a witness. I reached the front porch just as a man in a weathered sea jacket stepped out of a truck parked at the curb. He was carrying a blue manila folder, and as he reached for the doorbell, our eyes met in the rain. The rain is cold, but the man standing on the porch looks like he's made of iron. He's weathered, his skin etched with the deep lines of a life lived against the wind, and his hands, those thick, calloused hands, are trembling as they grip a blue manila folder. I am standing 3 feet away from him, the bundle of intercepted letters heavy in my bag, and for a heartbeat, the world stops. The jazz music from inside the salon is muffled into a dull hum, replaced by the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. I know this man. I know the set of his jaw and the way he stands with his weight forward, ready to brace against a swell. It's Silas. It's my father. He looks at me, and I see the ghost of the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders, but his eyes are filled with a desperate, searching kind of grief. He doesn't recognize me at first, not the woman I've become. But he sees the pearl earrings, the ones he gave me, and his breath hitches. He doesn't say a word to me. He reaches out and presses the doorbell. It's a chime that sounds like a death knell. Inside, the laughter falters. I see my mother's silhouette move toward the door, her gait confident and airy. She opens it, the light from the foyer spilling out onto the wet stone, her hostess smile firmly in place. Julian, the late arrivals are, the words die in her throat. The transformation is instantaneous. Evelyn's face doesn't just go pale, it turns the color of ash. Her hand grips the doorframe so hard I hear the wood groan. She doesn't scream. She doesn't gasp. She makes a sound like air escaping a punctured lung, thin, whistling, and terrified. Silas, she whispers, and the name sounds like a curse. He doesn't wait for an invitation. He places his hand on the door, not with violence, but with a terrifying, immovable steadiness. 20 years, Evelyn, he says, and his voice is a low rumble that vibrates in the floorboards. I'm not standing in the rain for 21. He steps into the foyer, and I follow him, drawn like a moth to a fire that's about to consume everything. The music stops. The jazz trio lowers their instruments. One by one, the elite of Port Calloway turn toward the door. Julian is standing at the top of the 3 stairs leading down into the salon, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand, his expression shifting from annoyance to a cold, calculating confusion. He doesn't know Silas, but he knows a threat when it walks into his home. The invisible photographer is no longer behind the lens. I am standing in the center of the foyer, the rain dripping from my coat onto the white marble, watching as the man I was told abandoned me prepares to open a folder that contains the blueprints of our destruction. The silence in the grand salon is so absolute you can hear the rain lashing against the panoramic windows. 35 of the wealthiest people in the county are frozen in mid-sip, their eyes darting between the weathered stranger in the sea jacket and the shaking woman in the midnight blue dress. Silas doesn't look at the crowd. He doesn't look at the limestone fireplace or the 44 frames on the mantel. He looks straight at Julian. "I assume you're the man who's been living in my house," Silas says, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Julian's eyes narrow, his professional veneer sliding back into place. "I don't know who you are, but you're trespassing." Evelyn calls security. But my mother doesn't move. She is paralyzed, her eyes locked on the blue folder in Silas's hand as if it were a loaded weapon. Silas ignores Julian's command. He opens the folder and pulls out a single, creased sheet of paper. "This," he says, holding it up so the light from the chandelier hits the bold, black header, "is an emergency protective order filed in the Hamilton County Family Court on June 14, 2005. Petitioner, Evelyn Tillman. Respondent, Silas Tillman." He looks at the guests, his gaze landing on the local judge who had been laughing moments before. "It alleges that I brandished a weapon in front of my daughter. It claims I was a danger to her life. It's the reason I was barred from this town, this street, and my own child for 2 decades. He turns the page, his voice growing tighter, sharper. Paragraph 4 says the incident occurred at 2 p.m. on May 14. But I have the attendance records from Callaway Primary. Elara was in her 3rd grade classroom 3 miles away. I have the sworn statement from my foreman, who was with me at the boatyard. This order wasn't a protection, Julian. It was a perjury." I see Julian's face change. He's a man who deals in contracts and liabilities, and he's starting to do the math. He looks at Evelyn, searching for a denial, a sharp rebuttal, anything, but she is silent, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Silas isn't finished. He pulls out a second stack of papers, photocopies of cashier's checks. "Every month for 15 years, I sent $450 to a P.O. box listed in the custody agreement. I was told it was for Elara's education. I was told it was the only way I was allowed to support her without violating the order your wife manufactured." He drops the papers onto the hall table, right next to my unopened gift bag. $80,000, Julian. That's the price of a daughter's silence. I didn't choose the sea. I was exiled by a lie, and I paid for the privilege of my own disappearance. The room inhales, a collective, sharp intake of breath. The big reveal isn't just about a father returning. It's about the realization that the Sycamore Estate wasn't built on Julian's success alone, it was subsidized by the man they all thought was a deadbeat. The tension in the room is a physical weight, a pressure that feels like it's about to burst the windows. Julian takes a step down into the salon, his scotch forgotten on a side table. He looks at the checks, his eyes scanning the dates and the signatures on the back. $80,000, he repeats, his voice cracking just enough to show the fracture. He turns to Evelyn, his face turning a shade of gray that makes him look every bit of his 60 years. "Evelyn? Is this true? Did you tell me he signed away his rights? You told me he wanted nothing to do with her. You said he walked away for a payoff." My mother's pivot is immediate. The tears start, practiced, crystalline, the victim posture she's used to navigate every conflict of her life. She reaches for Julian's arm, her voice a trembling whisper. "I was scared, Julian. He was unstable. I did it to protect our life. I did it for Elara. You did it for the mantle." I scream. The sound of my own voice surprises me. It's loud, jagged, and full of 20 years of suppressed air. I step forward, pulling the bundle of letters from my bag and throwing them onto the table on top of the court documents. The white envelopes fan out, the hand-drawn anchors and the little anchor inscriptions visible to everyone. "I found these 20 minutes ago, Mom. In the guest house. In a box labeled junk. You didn't just lie to Julian. You lied to me. You stood in the kitchen and told me he didn't leave a dime. You let me sleep on a concrete floor and work 3 jobs to pay for a degree his money had already bought twice over. I look at Silas, and the grief in his eyes turns into something else. A dawning, horrific realization. He looks at me, then at the letters, then back at the door that leads down to the guest house. The guest house, he asks, his voice barely audible. You lived in the guest house? He turns back to Evelyn, and for the first time, the iron in his posture snaps. He looks at the luxury of the salon, the silk curtains, the catered spread, and the 44 frames of a family that didn't include his child. He realizes that the $80,000 he sent didn't go to my school, it went to the SUVs in the driveway and the riding lessons for daughters that weren't his. The silence returns, heavier than before, as Julian looks at his wife and realizes he hasn't been the king of the estate, he's been the warden of a 20-year fraud. And then, from the back of the room, Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who once asked if the guest house was a playhouse, stands up. She looks at Evelyn with a cold, piercing clarity. You told us she insisted on that room, Evelyn. You told us she was an artist who needed the solitude. The room begins to turn, the slow tide of the guests' loyalty pulling away from the woman in the midnight blue dress. But as Julian reaches for the phone to call his lawyer, a sharp, shattering sound echoes from the kitchen, and Sarah, the golden daughter, screams. The scream from the kitchen is the sound of the last pillar of the Sycamore Estate collapsing. Sarah, the daughter who was supposed to be at the center of the perfect universe, is standing in the doorway, her face twisted in a mask of realization. She isn't looking at the guests or the catering, she is looking at the blue folder, the checks, and then at me, the sister she let sleep in a garage while she slept under silk. The shattering sound was a tray of crystal flutes, now just 1,000 diamond-edged shards on the floor, reflecting the ruin of our mother's face. Evelyn tries to move toward her, her hands outstretched in that practiced, maternal plea, but Sarah recoils as if touched by something leprous. Don't, Sarah whispers, the word cutting through the room's stagnant air. You told me he was a monster, Mom. You told me Elara lived in the guest house because she was difficult. You made us part of this. Evelyn's pivot is a masterclass in desperation. She turns back to the room, her eyes wet, her shoulders slumped, trying to find one friendly face among the elite of Port Calloway. But the tide has gone out. The gold standard has tarnished in real time. She looks at Silas, the man she tried to bury, and her voice drops into a ragged, hollow hiss. I was a 29-year-old woman with nothing. I did what I had to do to give my daughter a future. I step into the light of the chandelier, my voice steady now, fueled by the 15 letters in my bag. No, Mom. You didn't do it for my future. You did it so you could sit at this table and pretend you never came from a shingled cottage with a boat builder. You didn't protect me, you selected me. You selected which parts of your life were worth keeping and which parts were junk to be stored in a box above a boat slip. The room feels like it's vibrating. Silas takes a step toward me, and for the first time, the invisible photographer is the only person anyone is looking at. He reaches out, his calloused thumb brushing a stray tear from my cheek. I'm so sorry, little anchor, he whispers, and the name feels like a key turning in a lock I forgot existed. I look at Julian, the man who spent 20 years ignoring the girl in his guest house. He is sitting in his leather recliner, his head in his hands, the birthday, Jubilee, now a funeral for his reputation. He was lied to, yes, but choosing not to see is a kind of choosing. He chose the comfort of Evelyn's lies because it made his life easier. Being a victim of a fraud doesn't excuse being a witness to a crime against a child. The silence that follows is a heavy, suffocating thing. One by one, the guests begin to move. It's not a dramatic exit, it's a slow, rhythmic retreat. Mrs. Gable is the first. She picks up her wrap, looks at my mother with a pity that is far more painful than anger, and walks out the front door without a word. Then the judge follows. Then the CEO. The jazz trio packs their instruments in a hushed, frantic silence. The slow tide is pulling out, and as they leave, they take the oxygen with them. The Sycamore Estate is becoming what it always was under the surface, a cold, empty museum of things that never happened. Evelyn is left standing against the limestone hearth, her midnight blue dress looking like a shroud, as her perfect world empties out into the rainy night. Silas doesn't look back at the house as we walk onto the porch. He doesn't look at the luxury cars or the manicured lawn. He looks at me. Behind us, the house is a chaos of muffled shouting, Evelyn's high, frantic defense, Sarah's sobbing, and the heavy, final sound of a door slamming upstairs. Probably Julian, finally locking a door against the woman he married. Silas stands at the curb, the rain bead chaining on his sea jacket. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he says, his voice thick with the weight of 20 lost years. "I just needed you to know. I needed you to have the folder. I needed you to know that the man in the blue pickup never stopped waiting at the curb." I look at the guest house one last time. The white, two-panel door is dented at the bottom. Behind it is the room with no windows. The room with the water heater that groaned in the night. The room where I spent 3,285 nights believing I was a mistake. I look at it and I feel nothing. It's just paint and metal. It doesn't own me anymore. The invisible photographer has finally stepped into the frame, and the image is clear. I reach into my bag and pull out the very first card, October 2005. The one with the hand-drawn anchor. I hold it against my chest for a second, feeling the paper crinkle under my palm. The truth doesn't expire, Aunt Martha had said. It just waits. I have the letters, Dad, I say, the word Dad feeling rough and new, like a piece of driftwood sanded down to the grain. He blinks, his eyes turning red, and he gives me that small, sad, real smile, the one I've been looking for in the reflection of 44 silver frames for half my life. "I know," he says. "I wrote them all. I sat at my kitchen table every October and I wrote to a ghost, hoping she'd hear me." I look at the truck, the same shade of blue as the one from my childhood, idling at the curb. "I'm going to call you tomorrow," I say. "And I want to see the Elara. I want to see the boat you built for me." He nods, his chin trembling, and for the first time in 22 years, the anchor holds. I drive home with the windows cracked, the salt air of Port Callaway filling the car. My phone buzzes on the passenger seat, a text from Maya, the other golden sister. "Is it true?" I don't reply. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm finished. I pull into my apartment complex at 9:47 p.m. It's a modest brick walk up, 40 minutes from the cliffs, but as I turn off the engine, it feels like a palace. I sit in the quiet for a long time, the bundle of letters resting on my lap. I pick up the one from 2012. Age 17. "I saw a girl who looked like you at the library today. I almost stopped the truck. I miss you, little anchor. I am 31 years old. I have 15 years of birthday cards to read. I have 22 years of silence to break. Tomorrow, I will meet Silas for coffee. I will say, 'Tell me about the cedar and the sawdust.' And he will. Because he's been rehearsing the story for 2 decades. Tonight, I sit with the cards arranged on my kitchen table in a perfect line, 2005 to 2020. My own mantle. My own timeline. And for the first time, every person in the photos I'm going to take will know they belong there. Some people will rewrite your entire history just to protect the version of themselves they need the world to see. They will bury your letters, steal your inheritance, and tell you that you prefer the dark. But the ocean always returns what it takes. The tide comes back. And when it does, it washes away the lies until the only thing left is the salt, the wood, and the truth. If this story reminded you of a voice you've been ignoring, or a door you've been afraid to open, take this as your sign. The door isn't just unlocked. It's wide open. Thank you for walking through it with me. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you at the next shore.
Have a story like this? Send it to us, and we'll share it with the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true family drama. Thanks for watching.